Today's video is about the critical transit of Saturn into the house of Pisces and the impact that it could have on different ascendants. But before I proceed with the video today, I will first just address a query that had been asked in the form of a comment. And the reason for addressing that query is because I feel that it will help many other students or aspiring professional astrologers get a perspective on that question that was asked. So here is the question, very nicely put, sir. I appreciate. Thank you very much for saying that. Can you please enlighten us on the difference between Karak and the house lords? So now, difference between the Karak. Karak literally means the significator. The significator. In other words, the significator loosely translates to the personality of the planet which most correlates with the house. So let me give you an example. We all know that the 8th house is the house of astrology, right? Is the house of occult sciences. And why do we say that it is the house of occult sciences? Because they are trying to identify hidden patterns. That is what they are trying to identify. So the critics of this house would argue that there are no hidden patterns, or there are no patterns which are hidden, which are very significant to us. So even if there are patterns, maybe pursuing information on that might not be very useful to them. And individuals who have that view, it is very useful, particularly if you are focused on the here and the now, and you are focused on what needs to be done in order to add tangible value to your life. In other words, individuals who have that view are it's a very auspicious view or a very favorable view if your focus is either on the dharam, arth or kam purusharth, that is duty, wealth or relationships, that is fame, pleasure, etc. If this is the direction in which your efforts are predominantly, you are predisposed to channel your efforts, then such a view is very, very logical. But what is the 8th house? 8th house is the moksha purusharth. The 8th, so 4, 8 and 12 represents the moksha trikon. So moksha basically means clarity of thought and knowledge, so which is eventually liberating. So we know that the 4th house represents the clarity of thought. So the 4th house is of course clarity of thought, which results in mental happiness and peace, etc. But largely, let's just put it this way, I mean, it's academics and so many other things, land, luxury. But when we are talking about it from the perspective of moksha purusharth, then it represents, simply put, clarity of thought. 8th house, of course, is occult sciences, or let us just say deep research. Like deep research, you're truly venturing into the unknown. This is venturing into the unknown, and it is a deep kind of research. So here we'll have that, and my spelling of unknown. And what is the 12th house? The 12th house, of course, at the early stages of your life represents materialistic consumption, that is things that give you pleasure, because we know Venus exalts in the 12th house. Then in the mid stage of your life will represent house of bed pleasures, that is intimate activity, as well as your sleeping habits, is what the 12th house would represent. In difficult stages of your life, it would represent hospitalization, isolation, perhaps even jail time. And at the very perhaps later stage in your life, it would represent liberation or moksha. So in other words, clarity of thought, having acquired knowledge through deep research, results in liberation, is the role of the 4th, 8th and the 12th house. When individuals allocate effort into these 4th, 8th and 12th houses, this is basically where they are eventually at later stage in their life going to head. Now, if we talk about the 8th house of astrology only, so this is also the house of sudden problems, challenges, difficulties in life. And we have already discussed this and would be well known to most of y'all that of the 12 houses, the 8th house is the most difficult house to be in. Consequentially, individuals whose first lords are in the 8th house or 9th lords are in the 8th house, they are not considered to be in great favorable positions. They have their own challenges because these houses are structurally so difficult. But what happens when you engage into structurally difficult things? You transform in a manner that is permanent. And this transformation, this hard work, these sudden ups and downs are the nature of Saturn. And therefore, Saturn is said to be the Karaka of the 8th house. Saturn is said to be the Karaka of the 8th house. And the Lord of the 8th house would depend on who the ascendant is. So, for example, if we look at this chart here, this is a Sagittarius ascendant. We will see number 4 written on the 8th house. So, the Lord of the 8th house is Moon in this particular chart. But the significations, that is the outcomes that come from this house, have a personality or a nature which is similar to that of Saturn, and therefore Saturn is said to be the Karaka of the 8th house. The next question here is, I will just mark this here a little lower, and I will remove this from this point. So the next question is also if Jupiter forms a Gaj Kesari Yoga with Moon. So when does Jupiter form a Gaj Kesari Yoga with Moon? When Jupiter is either conjunct with Moon, or Jupiter and Moon are in the Kendra to one another, that is houses 1, 4, 7, 10. So now if it forms a Gaj Kesari Yoga with Moon, and what is a Gaj Kesari Yoga? A Gaj Kesari Yoga mean sunega sabki karega khud ki kind of an attitude. And generally, because Jupiter and Moon are natural benefics, when they come together into a single house, or they are closely aspecting one another, etc., or they are in kendras to one another, it is generally said to be beneficial. But I'm obviously using the word generally because whenever we are talking about a planet, we are looking at 3 things. The first one is the strength of the planet, which would be determined by the Shadbal and the degree distance that the planet has from the ascendant, which is what we covered in the previous video. The next thing that we are going to look at is the dignity of the planet. That is the planet happy or sad? And this would be, there are many ways of seeing it, would be by Vimshopak Bal, Sthan Bal, which is a unit of Shadbal, and Vaishik Shamsa Bal. It's a tough spelling. Vaishik Amsa Bal. Okay, these are 3 ways. There are many ways actually, but these are 3 ways in which you can identify the dignity of a planet, whether the planet is happy or not happy where it is. And there is a lot to be seen here. For example, we all know Venus debilitates in Virgo. But Venus, let us say at 7 degrees in Virgo, will be in Pisces in the Navamsha. So which means in the Navamsha, Venus is exalted, but in the D1 chart, Venus is debilitated. What would that mean? That will give mixed results. So in order for us to determine if a planet is truly debilitated, it must be debilitated or unhappy or in enemy signs in all the divisional charts, which will actually happen at its peak debilitation value. So while Venus is debilitated in Virgo, but at Virgo, let us say somewhere between 5 to 8 degrees, it will go and exalt in Pisces in the D9, and therefore this Venus would have most likely a neutral Vimshopak Bal, or it could even have a positive Vimshopak Bal or a positive Sthan Bal. And what would happen if an astrologer only looks at the fact that Venus is at Virgo or Mars is in Cancer and goes and says you need to do Venus ka upay, or you need to donate Mars? That astrologer could be making a mistake, a significant mistake, because it is possible that the planet which is debilitated in the first house has actually reached a Mool Trikon or exaltation in the other charts, the other Varga Kundlis, so to speak, which we in English will call divisional charts. So this would determine the dignity of the planet, and finally we would identify the role of the planet, and here we would check the Naisargic tough spelling, Naisargic, I do not know, Naisargic role, which is the natural Mitrata, and the Tatkalik Mitrata. So, which means that whether it is, so obviously, for example, Saturn in Leo ascendant. So, Saturn is obviously considers Sun to be a natural enemy, which means Saturn, which is the planet of, let us say, for example, fairness, it exalts in Libra, where you treat everyone fairly, equally. Such a planet obviously dislikes the personality of Sun, which is like a leader, like a role that is the opposite of being fair, that is largely channeling power and energy into a particular house, a particular person. So naturally Saturn does not like Sun, and we know that Sun also dislikes Saturn. So in such a case, for all Leo charts, Saturn would generally play the role of a it will be a Nesargic Shatru, it will be a natural enemy. But in some charts, Saturn might not be the enemy and could be a neutral. And this is what we have to identify through the temporary and the permanent friendship status of the planet. And this relationship that we identify of Saturn with Sun in a Leo chart, for a better assessment of the chart, needs to be analyzed of Saturn with all the other 8 planets. Of course, with itself it will be neutral. So all the 8 planets, the grahas that are there, that role needs to be identified and documented before we can truly calibrate that a particular planet is malefic or benefic in that particular chart. And only once we have understood that, can we go ahead with certain levels of predictions. As you can clearly see, there are certain checklists and checkpoints, which means that some time needs to be spent before we start making statements on a particular chart. And unfortunately, when you visit the astrologer in a mall, they are under pressure to speak as soon as you sit with them. And that kind of a pressure will result in what you will see. That is, if you see Venus in Virgo, you will say, "Are debilitated Shukra hai, relationship will be in problem, or maybe the kidneys could go and suffer." But the person might be the happiest in a marriage, actually. And why happiest in the marriage? Because significator, like we said, Saturn is the significator of the 8th house, these house of deep troubles, occult, mysticism, persistent life, etc. Venus is the significator of marriage, which is the 7th house. So that is the reason why individuals, if they see problem in Venus, will talk about a difficult love life over a difficult marital life. So this needs to be identified. Now, the minute you say that you have Jupiter and a Gaj Kesari Yoga. So in fact, since I have spoken at length, like I said, that most people who watch this channel on astrology, because predominantly this is a channel for trading, but which is my primary career, and astrology is obviously something that I'm exceptionally passionate about, because it is my belief and my strong belief. I think it is backed by credible information, that Indians in the past truly excelled at documenting time. They really excelled. So for example, today we note time based on the position of the sun and the moon relative to earth. So these are the only 2 variables that we are seeing when we determine time. But what the Indians in the past have done is they have documented time based on everything, like whatever is visible from the earth, right up till the position of Saturn. And in that process, identified what is auspicious, inauspicious for specific periods of time. So the point being that whenever we are assessing a particular yoga, or whenever we are assessing a particular combination in a particular chart, before we do that, we have to follow a series of steps. And when the Gaj Kesari Yoga is formed, obviously, which means that Moon and Jupiter, if they are conjunct, in this chart they are not conjunct because the person has given the information, but if they are conjunct, then in that case Moon would obviously be considering Jupiter as an enemy, and Jupiter would be considering Moon as a neutral. So even though Gaj Kesari is a very auspicious yoga, but if they are conjunct, then in that case Moon becomes enemy of Jupiter and Jupiter becomes neutral to Moon. But if they are 4 and 10 houses away, that is, Moon is in the 1st house and Jupiter in the 4th house, or Moon in the 1st house, Jupiter in the 10th, and vice versa, from any house, 4 and 10 places away, in that case Moon becomes friend to Jupiter and Jupiter becomes extremely friendly to Moon. That becomes a much more auspicious combination. Then the next thing is, what is the role of Jupiter and Moon with the sign lord itself? So for example, if it is a Mars zodiac, or if it is a Sun's zodiac, which means if it is Aries or Scorpio or Leo or Sagittarius or Pisces, In such cases, obviously these lords have favorable relations with the sign lord. So Gaj Kesari Yog, if the Jupiter and the moon are extremely strong, are very well placed, are natural and even in this chart permanent friends, in very friendly to the sign lord. Now that kind of a Gaj Kesari Yoga is a very very strong one. Similar thing, that same Gaj Kesari Yoga, if it is to happen, let us say for example in Mercury's chart, that is Virgo or your Gemini. Now Jupiter hates Mercury, right? So that kind of a Gaj Kesari Yoga in Mercury chart loses value relative to that same Gaj Kesari Yoga in Mangal or Surya Sun's chart. The same Gaj Kesari Yoga. So it depends truly. Similarly, Venus, Jupiter hates Venus. So logically, Taurus and Libra, the Gaj Kesari Yoga limits in utility. Then whether Moon and Jupiter are conjunct and or 7th places away, that could impact versus whether they are 4 or 10 places away. So there is too many variances. There are too many variances before we speak about a particular topic, and in particular about a person's horoscope. And therefore, if you are alive, healthy, happy, that Gaj Kesari Yoga is auspicious for you. This should be our default assumption. So will it hold? So the question is also, if Jupiter forms a Gaj Kesari Yoga with Moon in the 12th and Jupiter in the 6th. Yeah, will it hold true? Of course it will hold true, because they are 7 places away. That's without doubt. But why is he asking this question? Because 6th house is the house of enemy. Now, if it is a Mars chart, Mars really loves that house. Now, it really depends. 6th house kiska hai, tumhara ascendant kaun hai, and there are tons of things. Like I said, right? That doesn't matter. The rule is simple. Gaj Kesari Yoga equals to Jupiter and Moon conjunct 7, 4 or 10 places away, which is happening, which means by all definitions, it will be a Gaj Kesari Yoga. Now, whether they are strong, not strong, this is obviously Kundli specific. Because 6th is the house of enemies. Right. So he's basically saying Jupiter in the 6th. Now Jupiter in the 6th, and if the person is a lawyer, that's a very auspicious combination. Right? Because Jupiter is the Karak of law. And 6th is the house of enemies, like he said. So for a lawyer to be in a court defending his client against enemies, that is very, very privileged position to have. Similarly for a surgeon in the 6th house, because it is the house of rogue, disease. So if a person is a surgeon, a doctor, and surrounds himself with diseases, that person will gain a lot of success in life. I mean, if you look at one of the charts I analyzed, it was a Mercury ascendant with a combust Mercury in the 6th house. And that person is a doctor. So what would be the recommendation? That because the planet in the 6th house can give diseases, the question is, who should get the disease? If you can heal other people, the disease will still be there, but it will be to other people. I mean, you're still surrounded by disease only, but you are not the one who's sick. But if the same doctor quits their profession, sits in the house, and let's say for example pursues astrology or trading or something else, now the 6th house ka lord ka result of giving disease, where does it manifest? It could come in the person's body. And then the fact that the lord could be combust or in an enemy sign and things of that sort, that will aggravate the situation. So therefore, by itself, being in the 6th house, it is not a bad place. It's too limited information, so you should not obviously be concerned, and you have to trust the greatness of God. Because if really Jupiter was in the 6th house was that bad, then 1/12 of the world should be suffering, because that is where Jupiter is for 8.25% of the people in the world to begin with. The next is with Moon in the 12th. Now, with each combination, the percentage of people in the world exposed to that chart will be lower. Now, Moon in the 12th, is it a good placement or a bad placement? Now, why? See, Moon in the 12th is very bad placement if a child is born with Sun in the 8th, Moon in the 12th, because there are real concerns of longevity of life. Like whether ye bachcha zinda bhi rahega ki nahi. But I'm assuming you're a middle-aged person. So now that combination of giving a short life, that part of it is gone now. Now what is Moon in the 12th? 12th obviously is healing. And Moon is in the house of healing. So where will your mind gain maximum peace and clarity and happiness? When you are engaged in such activities. Of course, it could also be house of bed pleasures. It could also be house of materialistic consumptions. But we will have to see where Venus is, which chart it is, and so on and so forth. But regardless, that is not the point of astrology. It is not the point of astrology to tell you who you are. If you are honest with yourself, most likely you will tell us who you are and how this position plays a role in your life. The real point is to identify rituals connected with those planets which are malefics in your chart, so that you could potentially benefit. And here is the point that I'm trying to make, that there are only 3 deliverables that you could get from an astrologer. The first one is the mantras or the prayers that you should chant. The second one the second one would be the donations you make, and the third one would be the gemstones that you wear. Now, of these three, I personally believe the most auspicious is the mantras, because first of all, the astrologer cannot get it wrong. Let us assume I assess that Jupiter is malefic in your chart, so why don't you do Guru Bij mantra, and I tell you that go ahead and do this, let's say 76,000 times, and well, it later on turns out that Jupiter was not a malefic in the chart. I was entirely wrong. You see, there are no negative consequences of that activity. In fact, that activity will only benefit. It would have been a lot more beneficial if you would have correctly identified the malefic and gone after that malefic. Your quality of life would have improved significantly. But there is obviously no loss. In fact, there is gain. The loss has happened is of the donation of time. But if you make that assessment and you make that mistake and you end up saying Jupiter is a malefic, please go and donate Jupiter, and Jupiter happens to be your sign lord, then you could literally be cutting down your life. You could literally be falling sick. So a person who has Sagittarius or a Pisces ascendant, Jupiter as the sign lord, such a person should not go around distributing or donating books, because it is the donation of Jupiter. You should not be doing that. If you have to gift, like let's say, who does Jupiter consider enemy? Jupiter considers, let us say, Venus as enemy. It considers Mercury as enemy. So what is Mercury? Mercury is stationary item. If you want to give stationery, if you want to give something like books, then why don't you simply give pens or color pencils and crayons, and if that is the donation that comes in the chart. But like I said, that when you donate, and if you end up donate the planet of good fortune, the planet of your life, longevity of life, you really cause yourself more harm than good. And therefore donations need to be recommended only after a chart has been thoroughly studied, and while mantras are in process, that is, there is no point in time. And I consider those people who basically pay pundits, say 40, 50, 60, 70,000 rupees to do those jobs on their behalf, instead of doing this themselves. If you cannot do a one-line Bij mantra, then pretty much shame on you. You should do it. You must do it, in my opinion. I mean, if I'm talking so much on astrology, there is a tangible reason that I feel that it benefits, it adds value to my life. It could perhaps add value to your life, assuming that it cuts across all human beings. So mantras, yes, definitely. And if you feel your Saturn is malefic, or if you feel your Jupiter is malefic, and you feel your moon is malefic, go for it, and you would have proof of it. If your moon is malefic, generally you would have very bad relations with your mother. It is not possible that your moon is out there very terrible, malefic, and like in all sorts of pain. And let us assume that moon is also your 4th house lord for Aries ascendant, representing your mother, and it is in combustion, Amavasya, something, and you are also having great relations with your mom. Alright, it is very tough to imagine that scenario. If the moon is terribly placed, you will see that manifest in your life. You will see depression in your life. You will see loss of hygiene in your life. You should see that. If that is happening, you could look at your own life as a proof of concept that moon could be malefic. If you have diabetes, or if you have, let's say, some thyroid problem, then Jupiter is in pain in your chart. So you don't have to go to an astrologer to find out whether my Jupiter is in pain, or whether my moon or Mars or whatever. What does Jupiter, my Jupiter mean? My Jupiter means that part of Jupiter which is significated in my body. If that part is in plane, if you're having fatty liver or diabetes or obesity or cholesterol, then of course Guru Bij mantra is something you can safely do without even knowing your Kundli. You could be doing that. But to donate Jupiter based on, say, a fatty liver prognosis or a cholesterol identification, that could be very stupid. So be very careful before you donate. And if you have diabetes or fatty liver and you go and wear a pukhraz, you are inviting so much of trouble into your life. I mean, don't push it just because this is, let us say, non-scientific, or some people say that astrology is pseudoscience, and it is basically the refuge of the stupid or whatever. Like, you have those arguments, it is fine, you could totally push it. But I'm telling you, wearing, let us say, your 8th house lord or a malefic planet's lord or a planet which is clearly giving trouble, wearing that particular gemstone could put you into massive amounts of trouble. Particularly if the gemstone itself is of low quality, like broken or cut and oil filled. So yeah, so a lot of it, I think, the initial intention for me was to create a video on the transit, but this question I felt touches base on various topics of astrology. I will be covering all of these topics, like what is Shadbal, how do we measure degree distance. I also touched base on my previous video. Vim Shopak Sthan, Nesargik Tatkalik Mitrata, I've already touched base. But my intention is not just like, okay, touch base, like if like ye hai to ye hai, but rather discuss real-time charts and real-time people, to make the subject interesting, and to perhaps learn together how we can use this subject in its utility in our day-to-day life. So I will create the video on Saturn transits as soon as I sit next, but I hope that answering these questions, or this question which was in a few parts, would be helpful to not just the person who asked the question, but even those who are in general looking for information on astrology. With that, I wish you all the best. Thank you for your time.